One of the more popular watch complications is undoubtedly the chronograph. However, many have a completely warped view on how complex developing a chronograph caliber is, leading to unrealistic expectations among consumers. With this being the case, what I wanted to do with this video is look at what I would classify as 4 of the top entry-level chronographs that also represent 4 different executions of the chronograph based on the movements inside, in order to help develop proper expectations of the landscape and what to look out for. These watches are not necessarily the least expensive, but are representations of delivering arguably the best package for their specific intended execution. So the categories that we're going to be looking at here are basically 4. First is going to be the most attainable mechanical chronograph overall, then looking at one of the best Quartz offerings, then moving into entry-level Swiss modular chronographs, then finally wrapping it up with the entry-level Swiss integrated chronograph. We'll be going into detail in that order, and we'll offer pretty much an abbreviated review with most of our focus being on the movement positioning. So if you want a full review of any of these, we can link to those videos in the description. But if you are interested in kind of that next level up from the chronographs that are going to be mentioned here, I would recommend looking at the Longines Big Eye family, a watch that I'm very happy to announce is now available on Baldassarre.com. Now, why I feel this watch is the next step is that it takes a fully integrated chronograph movement developed exclusively for Longines and offers a column wheel function and an extended power reserve over the other value-based calibers in the range north of 60 hours. Oh, and a design that is one of the best military-themed pieces out there and is true to Longines's rich heritage. Check it out on Baldassarre.com. But to begin our list here, let's start with the most attainable mechanical chronograph, a watch that is a true anomaly in the world of watchmaking with the Seagull 1963. This inexpensive chronograph is equipped with an ST19 caliber produced in China with tooling acquired from the Swiss manufacturer Venus many years ago. The Seagull 1963 can easily be purchased for around $300 to $400, meaning the watch is a natural inclusion in this list simply because it puts this type of integrated mechanical chrono caliber in a price range that otherwise simply would not be possible. In terms of wear, the Seagull 1963 has a 38mm by just under 47mm case that for me wears rather true to that size, offering a dressier presence thanks to a fully polished case execution. A heavily domed acrylic crystal evokes a strong vintage impression while also bringing this watch up to 14.5mm in thickness, though I wouldn't say it wears to that full degree. Beneath the crystal, a well-finished dial for the price is executed in much of the same fashion as the original watches from 1963. With an off-white central dial surface, raised polished indices, artificially blued hands, and a red central chrono seconds hand that all combine to create a legible and attractive package. Turning the watch over, we then can see that Seagull caliber on the inside. So this is where the idea of the anomaly in watches comes into play. For under $1,000, you are going to struggle to find literally any mechanical chronograph, let alone a fully integrated movement, meaning there is no module on top of this base movement architecture in order to enable chronograph function. It's all done within one singular movement construction. The Seagull delivers all of this for well under $1,000 while also being a manual winding watch, which will expose many of the components given the absence of a rotor. But just to pile on top of the many aspects leading in its favor, it operates using a column wheel, a snappy and more premium execution often utilized by higher end calibers. Simply put, this is a movement that is going to reside within the most attainable mechanical chronographs on the market while delivering premium features that are seen in luxury watches. And this movement has now become adopted by many micro brands, as well as flavor of the week AliExpress offerings. That said, it is important to note that this movement does come with its own issues, mostly when it comes to serviceability. Chronograph servicing can be expensive, and despite this being an attainable price for a product, when it comes to the time to service, prepare to make a decision on buying a new movement and paying a watchmaker to assemble it within the case, or simply buy a new watch, as it will be less expensive than finding a watchmaker to disassemble and then service from the ground up. Just understand the context around this piece. It is an exception for the price, but that also comes with some additional considerations of maybe outkicking its own coverage with the movement within. But say you want to pay relatively similar money, don't care as much about a fully mechanical movement, but just want something that delivers on looks and value, and also as a chronograph. For this, let's transition to the next fixture in entry-level chronographs with the Bulova Lunar pilot. So when thinking about quartz-powered chronographs, there are actually quite a bit that could certainly be suitable even for less money, starting with some entry-level Timex offerings. However, I think the history, looks, movement, as well as the finish of the lunar pilot brings enough to the table in order to make it a definitive standout for the range. The lunar pilot, a part of Bulova's archive collection, is based on a vintage Bulova chronograph worn by NASA astronaut David Scott on the moon during the Apollo 15 mission that was later sold for a cool $1.625 million at auction. The new lunar pilot borrows the basic visual design, but executed in an updated larger case and with a high frequency oscillation of the quartz, and in turn, a high accuracy quartz caliber. In terms of the finishing, the lunar pilot is utilitarian with a blasted case and the distinctive wide rectangular pushers carried over from the original model. At 45 millimeters in diameter, 52 millimeters with its lug to lug, the concept of the size is the main point of contention, as it wears like a 43 to 44 millimeter watch. Set beneath a sapphire crystal, the lunar pilot exhibits a matte black primary dial surface, a dial printed with white markings and designed to closely mimic the original moon watch. But I am sure there are a number of people that are maybe watching this video, maybe some enthusiasts just saying like, okay, but it's a quartz watch. But this isn't any ordinary quartz movement. Bulova labels this as one of their high-performance quartz movements that buzzes away at 262 kilohertz, which is 8 times the rate of a typical quartz oscillator, a frequency that I might add is already set at a blistering pace of 32,768 complete back and forth motions every second. With this up frequency, it creates a level of accuracy of plus or minus 5 seconds per month. To also help it fall into favor is the enhanced sweep that resembles a mechanical second hand. Although it is not going to be as clean of a sweep, it still helps scratch the itch of a mechanical chronograph with really not coming forth with any other true compromises apart from its large size. So now that we have looked at under $1,000, I want to move into mechanical Swiss chronographs. For this, we're going to be looking at 2 separate executions, one being a modular system and the other being a fully integrated movement. So I have 2 videos that I'm going to link to down below. One will be everything you need to know about your chronograph, and the other will be looking at the different third-party movements and just kind of laying the ground for what to consider when looking at different movements by different providers. Link to those down below. Those will go into a bit more context on what I'm talking about here. However, let's first start with looking at our modular choice with the Tissot Heritage 1948. Despite the mid-20th century look, the 1948 leans into a more modern sizing as well as one of the more approachable price points for this type of caliber in a Swiss watch. When it comes to the wearing experience and case finishing, the Heritage 1948 measures at 39.5 millimeters in diameter and 48 millimeters in terms of the lug to lug, making this watch well within the bounds of comfortable wearing for the majority of wrists out there. The case itself is largely polished from the step bezel to the turn lugs, the crown, and oval-shaped pushers, giving this Tissot a dressy aesthetic. The dial is executed with a white primary surface paired with applied small circular indices and a large but candidly somewhat strange Roman numeral denoting the 12 o'clock index. A polished Lee-style handset manages the time-telling duties atop 3 sub-registers with the orientation made possible by the ETA 2894 within. To sum it up simply, the ETA 2894 is a modular chronograph movement built upon an ETA 2892 base, a 3-hand, slim automatic caliber. On top of the base is a module that enables the chronograph functions in the tri-register display. Now, modular systems have a few things going for them and against them. When discussing the positives, they are generally much thinner than their value counterparts, they offer a unique register layout for the price, and most importantly, are generally more cost competitive. But given their separated components, this can lead to less straightforward servicing, as you have additional parts to consider, and oftentimes watchmakers opt for just replacing the module with a new one rather than rebuilding it from the ground up. With these being factors, I felt Tissot presents the most upside of the modular system and is able to reduce some of the concerns by having a pretty straightforward pricing that they broadcast on their site with solid transparency when it comes to looking up their service costs. There are some micro brands that dabble in the arena of modular systems, but given their unconventional construction, I would prefer to be looking at a brand that has a bit more of a proven reputation when you're dealing with this type of setup. Modular systems are nothing to necessarily be afraid of, but I think a lot of people overlook this type of reality and just understanding what is actually happening. But say you are now someone who wants a fully integrated mechanical chronograph, being Swiss made, and wants the best bang for buck. I think our next example is going to be the perfect representation of that with the Hamilton Intramatic Chrono H. When trying to identify the long-established king of entry-level Swiss mechanical chronographs, it's rather easy. Valjoux is unparalleled. The popular Valjoux 7750 and 7753 are to chronograph movements what the ETA 2824 is to three-hand calibers. Reliable, time-tested, and no nonsense. To get into the world of Valjoux calibers, you typically are going to be around $2,000 for a starting price, with of course there being some more competitively priced outliers. In addressing this category, I've selected the Hamilton Intramatic Chronograph H, an attractive chronograph, again featuring a mid-20th century design, here executed with a fully integrated Hamilton H51 based on the Valjoux 7753 caliber, but modified to be manual wound by dropping the oscillating weight. At 40 millimeters in diameter and just under 49 millimeters in length, the Chrono H is pretty true to a 40 to 41 millimeter case size with its more refined styling, especially when paired with that quality mesh bracelet. The Chrono H also features polishing on its anterior surfaces with brushing on its near vertical sides. In general, the architecture is straightforward, allowing a well-finished dial to really pop. Executed in white or black, the Chrono H takes up the classic Panda and reverse Panda design, coupled with applied faceted indices, aged loom, and pencil-style hands. Working in the watch's favor is the history as well of Hamilton in developing automatic chronographs in the early 1970s and being a contributing brand to the automatic chronograph developments of 1969. When it comes to third-party integrated chronograph calibers, the ETA Valjoux 7750 is the undisputed leader, included in watches from this range way up into the world of luxury calibers. The 7753 that serves as the base for this H51 is essentially the same caliber as the 7750, but configured with a horizontal display. This Hamilton version is modified further by removing the rotor and enhancing the power reserve to an impressive 60 hours. A couple other points when looking at Valjoux, because although it is integrated, serviceability is going to be great, reliability is going to be great as well, given that these are just proven in the marketplace, there are some other things to consider. One is going to be the thickness. A Valjoux 7750 or 53 is going to be around 8 millimeters thick, and that's just for the movement. And when you're talking about a Swiss-made watch under, say, $5,000 that's a chronograph, unless you're going in-house, you're going to be using one of these movements. So when people say, oh man, I wish this chronograph was 11 millimeters thick, I just don't think people have proper expectations of what is possible when utilizing an automatic chronograph. In addition to that, there's this thing called Valjoux rotor jiggle, or I don't know if that's necessarily the actual technical term, but it's something that I've just kind of attributed to these movements. And that is when you have one of these watches on your wrist, you will feel the movement of the rotor, and it could be a bit noisy. Now, this isn't always the case. You can kind of bypass this depending on the case construction, it being a little bit less noticeable, but that is another thing to look out for. It's mostly gonna be the thickness. It's not the most gorgeous movement to look at, but they simply work. They're cam actuated, they've been in the market for decades, and they're going to be the standard when it comes to a Swiss automatic chronograph. And just to close out this video, a couple other honorable mentions at the end, or maybe just the next steps. You're looking at these are kind of more, I would say, entry-level chronographs, but maybe you want something a little bit more. The two next stops, I would say, is Longines with their chronographs, the big eye that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. You're basically getting a Swiss column wheel chronograph movement that is made for Longines exclusively by ETA, which is going to give some nice exclusivity to that, and being priced in that $2,000 to $3,000 range, which in that range, you're talking more Valjoux. I mean, Valjoux movements are being used by high-end manufacturers all the way up to $10,000. Now, some people might have issues with that being the case, but that is still a reality for many brands that just don't have access or the capabilities to produce their own in-house chronograph. But as a second option, I would then mention the Tudor Black Bay Chrono. Now, why this is such a compelling offering is just going to be that it's using a Breitling B01 base movement on the inside. That is a true luxury chronograph movement, column wheel as well, extended power reserve of 70 hours. They're also upgrading it with some anti-magnetism components, silicon balance wheel, silicon hairspring, and at retail, these are absolute steals. Now, these are, I think, trading a bit higher than retail right now, but honestly, these at retail were almost too compelling when you factor in that a Breitling using the same movement on the inside is priced basically $3,000 more. Now, you can mention the finishing maybe not being the same as a Breitling, but I don't know about $3,000 difference. So where these were positioned at retail, I think are very competitive. And I think now many enthusiasts are becoming a bit more savvy about what the package was with the Black Bay. And since they've now reduced the thickness a little bit, I think there's a lot going for those watches. But those would be two other jumping off points. Of course, you can look at the Speedmaster, the El Primero, other Breitling options. It kind of just ascends from there. But when you're looking at the entry-level position, the real reason why I wanted to make this video was to kind of just set the foundation, because a lot of people I don't think necessarily consider how, when you ask maybe for a chronograph under $1,000 that's Swiss-made mechanical, what they're really asking for. The reality is it's really not possible, or it doesn't happen very often unless you're dealing with something that's really heavily discounted out there, and there's probably a reason why. It's probably not the best looking thing that you've ever seen. But I hope this video was helpful in just kind of setting those different types of standards when looking at chronographs. There's a lot out there. Those are just 4 different examples. Maybe when you're shopping in the future, just looking at watches, think about where is that watch going to be categorized in this hierarchy that we kind of laid out here, and then just kind of see and use these watches maybe as a point of comparison, or just using them as a jumping off point as you continue your research. There's a reason why Patek as well as Rolex were using other movements to power their chronographs for many years, and it honestly wasn't that long ago where this was the case. I think that just goes to show how much is involved with the chronograph. I think we take it for granted now, just given the design becoming so iconic with the sub-registers, but it is one of the more complicated and biggest feats that a manufacturer can accomplish for developing their own in-house chronograph. And with that being the case, you're gonna usually have to look for these third-party options. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you did enjoy it. That really does help out the channel. Would appreciate that as well. And then finally, TeddyBaldassarre.com. Definitely check it out. Over 30 brands as a full authorized dealer. Quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support. Also offer a full factory warranty for all the products that we carry. We're talking about chronographs like we were talking about today. That matters a lot more, because you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of dollars if you start getting into the luxury segment of servicing a chronograph. Also, if you want to stay up to date with the content, be sure to follow on Instagram to see some great photos of watches in the process. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.